I know that there's been a huge shift around the pandemic and post-pandemic of people, first of all, really seeing what's happening in their kids' classrooms through Zoom school and starting to second guess whether or not that's the right educational option for their kids, but also having their kids at home and sort of having this stigma around you can't have your kids at home. What a crazy idea, blown to pieces out of necessity that sort of demystified homeschooling a little bit. Obviously, there's been huge cultural shifts around education because of that, that have made the time very ripe for the microschool movement and the school choice movement. But I'm really curious what you think some of the other factors are that are making now the time for this to catch on as opposed to a decade ago or 2 decades ago. And I'm particularly curious. Obviously, there are tons of digital education resources and academic resources that make it so much easier for a teacher to teach a classroom full of mixed age kids, and that also obviously empower the homeschooling movement. But I'm also curious about things like social media as an input. Like, how much do you think that has made a difference both in the proliferation of the idea of microschooling and homeschooling to make it a little less foreign and scary, but also allowing people to really tap into the network effects that are required to build a school, like this homeschool program that you just referenced, where there's 100 kids in a wait list. How much do you think social media powers people being able to find these types of programs in their community as opposed to trying to market it in the pre-internet age? Like, I'm really curious what you think some of the other things are in the present day world that are making all of these pieces come together for this proliferation of alternative education where, 10 years ago, the public school system was just as bad, but there wasn't this movement towards something else.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And just to, provide some context around this too, we know, for example, that homeschooling is gaining popularity. The Washington Post in fall of 2023 called it the fastest growing form of education in the U.S. Upwards of 6% of all K to 12 U.S. students are homeschooled, which is sort of on par with the number of students who attend public charter schools in the U.S. So that's about 7%, about 9% of students attending a private school. So lots of growth in homeschooling. Private school enrollment is also on the rise, and public school enrollment is falling beyond what was sort of naturally expected due to declining birth rates in recent years. So we knew there was going to be a dip in public school enrollment, but that dip has been far deeper than what was predicted because so many families are, choosing options besides a traditional public school. So, yeah, I think to answer your question, I think there are really three top reasons that are driving this growing demand for individualized, innovative education. And then the first one and the main one that I just already alluded to, and you have as well, are these network effects that just keep building on each other. This movement began well before COVID, well before 2020, but the network effects, the real sort of impact of this movement is really being felt now as more parents see what's possible for their children's education. They recognize that homeschooling, for example, is quite doable, that it's not sort of this, in many cases, the stereotype of a parent, typically a mom, sitting around a kitchen table with her children and a textbook and packaged curriculum. That there's homeschooling is much more versatile. There's so many more ways to approach homeschooling, and there's so many of these microschools and pods and learning collaboratives that sort of foundationally are based on homeschooling, and that students might be legally recognized as homeschoolers, but they could be attending a microschool, for example, up to 5 days a week as a full-time schooling alternative for a fraction of the cost of a traditional private school. You see the growth of hybrid homeschool programs which typically meet off-site 2 to 3 days a week with hired educators. Again, something that began back in the 1990s, but has seen skyrocketing popularity in recent years. So there's those network effects from the parent side, and then the network effects on the founder side of more of these entrepreneurial parents and teachers feeling that they have the confidence to be able to take on the challenge of running essentially a small business, running a school or a learning environment that serves the needs of their communities. There's incredible resources available to them now. I think of organizations like the National Microschooling Center or VELA, which is a national founder network, and philanthropy that provides microgrants to founders who are creating these innovative spaces. And then I think about, sort of startup accelerator programs like KaiPod and the KaiPod Catalyst program or Microschool Solutions that help entrepreneurial parents and teachers who want to create a program to, feel like they have the tools and resources to make that happen, kind of walk them through step by step. Launch Your Kind is another example, run by Kind Academy founder Iman Aline in Florida, that really helps more of these microschools get off the ground. So the network effects really are probably the biggest piece of this. But another reason that we see this current growth in these models are the growth of school choice policies across the U.S. And again, this was something that was taking root prior to 2020. We saw increasing appetite for education funding to follow students instead of going directly to school systems, so that families would be able to decide how, where, what, and with whom their children could learn. And again, since 2020, we've seen explosive growth in school choice policies. We now are up to 15 states that have universal school choice, and we had none as of 2020. And then we, in total, have 33 states plus Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico that have some version of private school choice, in which, again, a portion of state allocated education funding can go to students toward the educational setting that's right for them. And in many states, that setting can include microschools and homeschooling collaboratives and learning pods and virtual platforms and tutoring and educational therapies. Certainly the most expansive school choice policies take that expansive definition of education beyond schooling. So really enabling parents to unbundle education from schooling and decide exactly how they want to piece together an educational experience for their kids. So I think I often say that, this education entrepreneurship um, movement and interest in these learning models is happening everywhere, all across the U.S. It's happening in blue states and red states and purple states. It's happening in states with and without school choice policies. But it's definitely accelerating in states with robust school choice policies, especially states that have had sort of a long culture of choice in education, of parents really being in the driver's seat of their education. So I think about states like Arizona and Florida that for years have led the country in school choice policies. Those policies recently became universal, meaning that all K-12 students in the state are eligible for somewhere in the range of around $7,000 or $8,000 per student per year to use on educational expenses that are right for their kids. And because of the kind of culture of parental choice in education that those states and others have built up, we're seeing, rapid growth in these models. Very quickly, microschools filling to capacity and wait lists emerging, which is then a signal to other potential founders that there's unmet demand here, and we should, create our own program that enables more families to have just what they're looking for. And what they're looking for is really the third reason that I think we're seeing this current growth in these innovative individualized education models, and that is a real desire for personalization rather than this one-size-fits-all approach to education. If we think about it, and you talk about this a lot too, Hannah, is we have so much individualization and personalization in every other part of our lives. And yet in education, it's been historically very stagnant and standardized. And so I think parents, and it's especially true since COVID, are just sort of fed up with that one size fits all standardized education model and are looking for something that's much more responsive to their individual needs, that's aligned with their personal preferences and values, and that really meets their children where they are, recognizing that we don't all learn the same things in the same way at the same time. And we don't have to in an age where we have the capacity to tap into these incredible curriculum tools that enable us very easily to differentiate learning and teaching, to meet a child where they're at and help them to develop skills in their own timetable and reach their full potential.